Welcome to Conversations with Friends. My name is R.O. Smith, and this morning we have the privilege of talking to Charlie MacVean, but we're going to have him introduce himself to you in just a second. First of all, I want to encourage you that we have a chat, so make sure that you're engaging in the chat. And if you're watching this later, when it's not live, go ahead and leave comments. We'd love to hear from you and how you're engaging with the material. But happy Veterans Day, and with that, I want to introduce Charlie MacVean. Actually, I'll let you introduce yourself. So, you tell them your name and rank before you retired, and what branch of the military, all that good stuff.
Well, as a captain in the United States Navy, actually a Commodore because I had command of a squadron, which is honorary title that they give people who command more than one ship.
Okay.
Born and raised in Ridgewood, New Jersey.
Okay.
Met my wife in 11th grade.
11th grade, okay.
I was smart enough to say I want to sit next to somebody really smart in algebra, and so I sat behind Ellen, and so we've now been married 63 years, and we've
smart and beautiful, right?
Absolutely.
There.
The reason I got into the Navy was for the education.
Okay.
Scholarship to a college that you could get accepted at, and then when I got out of Dartmouth, the Navy was starting a program where they wanted people, PhDs at sea, and so the Navy sent me for another 4 years of postgraduate education to get a PhD in nuclear science and engineering.
Okay, so no military, and then, but what was your faith? Where was the faith background of your family growing up? Was there any? Did you talk about God? Was it? It
was. We never discussed God at home.
Okay.
My father was, he was a Christmas and Easter guy.
Okay.
My mother was brought up as a Methodist, but we went to church in the Episcopal Church in Ridgewood. I think my most memorable time in the church was being a Cub Scout. That's where we met as a Cub Scout. But
yeah.
I would not say that I had faith education. I went to Sunday school, but it was pretty perfunctory.
And did you go, if your father was a Christmas Easter guy, so you went because your mom went to church, basically?
Right.
Okay, that was kind of the...
Yeah, Mom took us under her wing, and that's why we were in church.
Okay. So you had some kind of background or some understanding of God, even though it was, as you say, perfunctory. You did have some kind of knowledge.
There certainly was a comfort factor that got built in during those times, but it's my mother and my grandmother on my mother's side, who was married to a Methodist minister, that you began to understand what the Bible was about.
Okay.
And my grandmother had very little money, but she always had a Bible, and so when she would come to visit, and it was usually for a month at a time. That's when I was taught things like everything from shine your shoes to turn the lights out after you leave the room to this is what the Bible's about. I think the overarching thing when I was growing up, though, was the feeling of trust that was engendered by my parents. They were so trustful of me and were supportive of almost anything I wanted to do.
And so you went to college at Dartmouth?
Right.
And then where'd you get and you got a PhD later from?
Right, got out of Dartmouth, was in the Navy for a year, and then the Navy sent me back after a year on a destroyer. I went back to Cornell.
Okay.
And studied nuclear physics, basically.
So your getting into the military was basically just, they were like looking for people to join and offering scholarships, and you're like, sign me up? Or how did, is it not that clean?
No, it's back to an Ellen story. We just started dating, and I was in the cafeteria with her, and I looked up at the clock, and I'm going to be late to class. So I bolted out of the cafeteria and threw open the swinging doors at the end of the cafeteria. I knew I'd hit somebody.
Oh no.
And so I looked down, there's the assistant principal, knocked out, tie up like this, and Mr. Foley, what can I do? He said, my office, 8 tomorrow morning. So I went there, and he said, look, Charlie, he said, you got pretty good grades. I think you're going to go to college, but you're going to be taking tests the rest of your life. And so I want you to take the hardest test I know of. Yes, sir. He said, well, it's a Navy test, but don't worry about that. Take it. So I had to drive to Princeton, took the test, and forgot about it. It was hard, 8 hours. Forgot about it. And I don't know, 6 weeks later, I came off the ball field, and as I came in the house, my father's standing there with a Navy letter, and it says, "Dear Mr. MacVean, you passed the mental test. Do you want to take the physical?" I said, "No, Dad. What's a Navy? I don't want any part of that." And the only time my father ever did this to me, he came up, touched my chest, and said, "You don't understand. Free physical, you're going." And that was it. And my father was not pushy. He was an insurance and mortgage salesman, if you will. And I wanted to be an engineer, and but it was one of the few times when he really just said, "Here's the decision."
Huh. Obviously, he was super supportive. Your family was super supportive of you joining the Navy. And
the fact that it paid for 8 years of college education, my father was the happiest taxpayer I'd ever met.
That's awesome.
And Ellen just, we both took to it. We liked the people. I like being at sea.
Yeah, so
I'm in the military.
Let's talk about her. So you met her in 11th grade. And did she go to college with you, or did what? Yeah, tell that journey of you and Ellen.
I went to Dartmouth, and she went to Green Mountain College, which was 100 miles west of Dartmouth.
Okay.
And so we saw each other on weekends. And
Okay.
she was in a 2-year program to become a medical tech. And at the end of those 2 years, she came back and lived with her mother and father, and worked at the hospital that was around the corner. Actually, it was the hospital where Lynn was born. But so then, my last 2 years at Dartmouth, we didn't see that much of each other. But she would get up there for weekends every couple of months or 6 weeks, and so then we decided to get engaged. And people say, "Boy, your Navy career is something. You must be very heroic." I said, "No, the most heroic thing I did was ask her father if I could marry her." That took guts. So I graduated from Dartmouth and was commissioned in the Navy, drove home, was married on Tuesday, and Wednesday we took off on a 4-day honeymoon. And we came back after 4 days. I got on a plane, flew to Montreal, and got on a ship.
Oh my gosh.
So Ellen and I only lived together 17 days the first year.
So you had a little bit of faith background as far as like just perfunctory, as you said earlier, but like when did it become, I guess, when did you have this kind of relationship with Jesus that they kind of talk about, or this kind of relationship with God? When did it become this kind of real thing for you?
On the first submarine that I was on, because submarines don't have any sleeping space, we did not have chaplains. And so one officer or senior enlisted guy would become a lay leader. So we had a Protestant lay leader, a Catholic lay leader, and a Jewish lay leader. So I became the Protestant lay leader, and with very little background.
Wait, they just threw that on you? Like you're going to be the lay leader. You're like,
that's right.
Okay.
Yeah, I stumbled down the hatch. I didn't know which end of the ship was going through the water first. XO said, "Oh yeah, you're going to be the main propulsion assistant, and by the way, you're the Protestant lay leader too." So it was like
that's like that's how we treat our VBS volunteers. You're just going to be a VBS volunteer anyway. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So the contest became whether the Protestants or the Catholics could get more, attendance at their services, and so I started serving donuts, which
of course
tended to help my attendance.
Yeah.
So that's submarine number one, and submarine number two is really the place where it happened, and it was all tied up with the tragic death of my brother in Vietnam, and this was a very traumatic time. We were on a Polaris missile patrol, and so we were not allowed to communicate outward. We could get messages in, and I was a navigator, and I'd been up taking stars, and was just trying to go to bed, and I could see the door open, and the ship is rigged for red at nighttime, and I could see the captain's silhouette. He wore glasses, and he had ears that were pretty big, so I could see just from his outline that it was a captain. And he came up and said, "Charlie, I have to tell you, your brother was killed in Vietnam." And he said, That's all I can tell you. And he turned to go away, and then he came back in and said, and you're not allowed to talk to anybody about that on this ship. And we'd only left a week ago, so I had 7 weeks in which I had to not talk to anybody about that. And the only thing I had was the Bible. And so I would, after about 2 hours after this announcement, I got up and went down to the wardroom and found the Bibles where I kept them and took it into bed. And in the darkness, because I didn't want my roommate to know what I was doing, I would just turn the pages. And so for those 7 weeks is when it became obvious to me that Jesus and the Lord was with me and would get me through that. I was more worried about Ellen because my mother lived in New Jersey still, but she'd come to visit the family in Connecticut, and so the chaplains could not find my mother. And eventually they did find, somebody said, well, maybe. And my mother did not recover. She, matter of fact, she stopped breathing a year to the day later, and heartbroken. So Ellen was taking care of that situation with 3 kids, and I was in this isolation cocoon that was debilitating. As a matter of fact, when the patrol was over, the captain was given the choice of being court-martialed or leaving the Navy, and during the investigation, they said, why did you do that? That was cruel and unusual punishment to do to your 3rd officer. And his excuse, which was bogus, he said, because MacVean was the only officer on the ship that I trusted, and I didn't want the crew to think he was distracted. Well, that's not correct. I mean, we had a wonderful crew on that ship, but he instantly left the Navy when we got back, and they've changed the procedures a lot, but it changed me in such a way that it affected the way I commanded the submarine when I got there. The fundamental thing about Christianity is when people are in need, don't leave them alone. Be with them.
I think it's interesting that you obviously you felt that loneliness, right? You had to hold this kind of secret, I guess, and you held it to yourself, and all you had to turn to was the scripture, and it's like, and through that, you're just like, man, I never want people to feel this loneliness, right?
That's very true, and prayer was the only communication chain you had at that point. And as a matter of fact, when we came back, and at some function, the doctor was there, and Ellen said to the doctor, how did you all do? And the doctor said, well, if it wasn't for Charlie, we wouldn't have made it at all. And Ellen said, wait a minute, doctor, you're supposed to be taking care of them. It's a 180. But it made me, it emphasized the golden rule to me, that you have to do unto others as you want them to do unto you, and recognize what they're going through. And so in command, I interviewed every sailor and officer and found out whether they wanted bad news at sea or not. And it was split, 50-50. Half of them said, I want news, bad news in real time. The others said,
wait till I get home.
I'll wait till I get home, because I got a full load here just being at sea. And but let me go back to this issue of being close to people that are under stress. I call it the sanctuary in our sanctuary, the miracle in our sanctuary. Some of you have heard this story, I think, but I don't know, Susie Deuce was still here, and we were going to the ball game, and I developed double vision. So I sat through the game, and there were 18 players on the field, and I was really messed up. But I called the hospital in the morning. It turns out the electrophysiologist optician was there, and he said, well, you obviously had a damage to your L4 nerve, and your left eye is misaligned by 15 degrees. I said, well, what are we going to do about that? He said, well, in about 6 months, it'll be normal. 6 months, I said. He said, yeah, and every week we'll grind you a new set of glasses to, refract that back to, well, I stopped going to church because I couldn't stand to look at the cross, because the cross looked like goalposts to me. There were 2 verticals and 1 horizontal. And after about 6 weeks, Ellen convinced me to come back to church. And there they were, the goalposts, But we were sitting there, and Susie Deuce came up behind me, and I didn't even know she was there. She leaned over and she kissed me on the cheek, just like she often did. And all of a sudden I could see, kaboom, for about 30 seconds, and my eyes drifted apart again. But every day thereafter, my vision would stay normal for a longer and longer time. It was 30 seconds, then it was 3 minutes, then it was 3 days. And in about 2 weeks, I was totally normal. I went back to the doctors and said, we've never seen that. We've never. So I call it the miracle in our sanctuary.
Yeah. If you greet each other with a holy kiss, and it was a healing kiss, right?
I know.
It's like that kind of,
that's a great pickup line, I know. But it was.
Good thing you were married, you'd be like, Susie, kiss me again.
But the fact was, Susie was, a lot of times when I know people are in stress, you leave them alone, but Susie didn't. She continued to approach me like normal. And so it's just another example of don't leave people alone.
I always think of the story of Jesus and the friends that carried their paralyzed friend to Jesus, right? And how, I always think what if they would have just said, oh, he probably doesn't want to go out. It's busy to try to get to Jesus. It might be too hard. But no, they went and pursued him, and they brought him to Jesus. And then because of that pursuing of the friends, this man was healed. It wasn't his faith; it was the friend's faith that healed him. And I think of that when I hear that story that you just told. I'm like, oh, it's almost like always pursue people, even if it feels, oh, I don't want to bother them. But it's like, no, they might need you.
Yeah, they do.
To bother them in a way.
They do. They need to know that you're thinking about them and that you're there to help them. And
right. And you can do it without pestering and being a pest, but just
absolutely, just offering to be there.
So it sounds like trust and belonging and community was huge to you, and I'm guessing that's how, when you led, it sounds like that was a big deal. When you're like interviewing every single sailor and wondering, do you want to know bad news on the ship or off the ship? And I'm guessing, it sounds like. And we had talked earlier, before we got on camera, you talked about how people, when they came on your ship, they said there was this palpable difference where there was a sense of trust, and I just can't help but wonder, is that sense of belonging, they felt that sense of belonging when they walked on your ship? And
the fact that I'd say I've heard from 100 in the last 2 years, and every one of them is a contributing member of our society. They're craftsmen, they're businessmen, they're first responders, they're fathers, and they all say, well, the Navy was tough. There were days that I could not whistle Yankee Doodle Dandy, particularly when you sent me into the bilge to clean it up. But on balance, it gave me a sense of accountability and responsibility, and they're solid citizens of the world, and that's the biggest feedback I've gotten.
How did you? I've always been fascinated. Like, how do people who are believers in Jesus, who follow God and love Jesus, and have allegiance to Him, and yet in the military there's an allegiance to country, commander in chief, and the people to your right and left. How do you hold those two things? And hopefully most of the time they go together, but sometimes if they're in tension, how do you navigate that, and how do you deal with that?
In the beginning of nuclear submarines, the country worried about that. And as a matter of fact, they would send psychiatrists to sea. We knew that the submarine worked, we knew the reactor worked, we knew the weapons worked, but we didn't know if the people, how they would react with 60 days submerged. And would that make it impossible for them to execute valid orders? And so there was a lot of work in the 60s about that. But it's the training that we go through that allows us to do things when they're required to be done. And certainly, your service is faith-based at a certain level. Everyone, even though they won't admit it, their faith may be expressed through trust in their crew member or their best friend or their loved one or the captain. I certainly worried about that, but it never bothered me. It was, I worried about it, but I always knew that through prayer that I would do the right thing.
Obviously, you're in the military. You're called to defend our country against, threats, foreign and domestic, all that. But I'm always like curious about like with war, or even if you've had to like, if you're about to fire a weapon that could could end human life, right? How do you, as a Christian, we believe in the sanctity of life, and so it's like, how would you navigate that? And
well, I think I navigated on an individual, one-on-one level to begin with. I mean, I had to give orders that most assuredly would send an individual to his death. And pray about that, but you knew the alternative was that if you didn't give those orders that perhaps would kill one of your own, in great probability many of your own would be killed.
Right.
And so, but it is a thing that you have to digest and come to your own conclusions about. I'm not sure that's a total answer for you, but it's a very,
well, it's not. It's nothing. Nothing's clean, right?
It's imponderable. I think that's the beauty of our faith, is that there are certain questions that can never be answered, and you have to just go to faith.
Right.
I'm okay. Even being a physicist, and I'd like to have all kinds of answers, I'm okay with the fact that there are things that are unanswerable.
Right.
Because of our faith.
Right. What's your stance, or how does it make you feel? Maybe it's a better question. How does it make you feel inside when you see like in athletics, the protests where they like they kneel for the national anthem, or or whenever the military seems to come under like major scrutiny, and where it just feels like it's almost kind of like does that just sadden you? Does it?
It saddens me, and yet I kind of say they just don't understand.
Yeah.
When my brother was killed, the next tour was in the Pentagon, which is when the time we're not allowed to wear uniforms, because people in Washington were so against the Vietnam War, which I understand.
Right. Right.
You can really, there's some things you just can't control, so you got to pray about it.
Right.
I've just been very blessed. I had the ships I was on, the crews I was around, the leaders that led me. But the 4 pillars of my career in the Navy were all chief petty officers. I got this guy, Chief Deere, I'm taking up too much of your time. He had just come back from Vietnam and wound up.
You're the one that has to get to lunch.
That's all right. But I was the main propulsion assistant on this ship, and so all the machinery in the engine room was mine. And he was the leading chief in that, and he was a terrific engineman. But he carried around this stick with him, and he would lean against the equipment and listen to it. I thought he was crazy, but after a while, after I got the guts to say, "Chief, can I borrow that?" And I followed him around like a puppy dog. And pretty soon, you could hear changes and difference in the machinery. You could hear some that would click, some. And I finally looked up and I said, "Chief, you really can hear something, can't you?" He said, "Yeah, Mr. Mack, you can hear something, but what you ought to do is listen to your troops." And I never forgot that. And I had another chief on Seawolf. I'd just gotten there, and we were back in the engine room. We were in port, and shooting a breeze, and we were telling jokes about where we were born, And so I don't know, some kid born in Kansas. I made some snide remark about Kansas, and so we broke up, and I was headed back toward the attack center, and this chief followed me, and we got to the reactor, and he said, "Captain, you shouldn't do that." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "You are so far above that second-class petty officer that if you make a joke about his upbringing, there's no way he can respond to you.
Hmm.
And so, but he was right. I mean, it was a blessing that that chief had the guts to come talk to Captain on week
Right.
2.
Right.
But he had such wisdom. I mean, he was absolutely right. You can't deprecate people and expect them, particularly when you're at that kind of a hierarchical, if you're buddies, you can do
Right.
that. But if you're not buddies,
And did you end up apologizing to that St. Cloud, or did you?
yeah, I did. I said, the Ellen story I'll tell. And then I was at a meeting in Washington. It was a submarine meeting after I was out of the Navy, and Ellen wasn't with me. But afterwards, there was a cocktail reception in this hotel, and this blonde kept looking at me across the hall. And pretty soon she's headed my way, and I said, "This is not good." And she threw her arms around my neck. I looked over her shoulder, and there was Bill Bailey, who was a sonarman on Seawolf. And Elizabeth whispered in my ear, she said, "Charlie, we all love you, but I really love Ellen. Because before I met Ellen, I was an observer of life. After I met Ellen, I became a participant."
Hmm.
It was such a telling story that...
I like that. I used to be an observer of life. Now I'm a participant. Wow, that's kind of how we are in our faith. Sometimes we're just observers of faith, but Christ calls us to be participants. So I want to thank you for joining us. Thanks for joining us on this Veterans Day. This is awesome. It's been so good to chat with you, and we just are so thankful for you and for all the people that have served in the military currently and in the past. So. And thank you for joining us. Make sure if you know a veteran, make sure you say thank you to them and thank their spouses as well, because they don't do it alone. So again, like and subscribe us on YouTube and on Facebook. Feel free to like and join our page there, and make sure you leave comments in the chat. We want to hear from you, and hope to see you next week. See you later.